I was just super taxed. And I said, you know what? I'm going to say no to the whole morning. Guess what risk I'm taking with my time? A hit in capitalistic abundance. I'm okay with that because I understand that my value metric is saying that silence, peace, well being, and space is more valuable to me than, being on 10 more podcasts. And I think that I mean, I love working with my partner. I don't think I could have had it any other way, honestly. I mean, I have a lot of water in my chart, so being merged with other beings and really understanding co-regulation and deep, deep intimacy is very, very important to me. And I also see that in my professional life. So it was sort of a no-brainer once Dan and I actually found each other.
Oh, that's awesome. What are your some of your astro placements? Like what is your sun, moon, and rising?
I'm a Cancer, Pisces, Virgo.
Okay, love it. Yeah, I've got
Yeah.
Pisces and Virgo. I'm a sun and rising Virgo, and then my moon is in Pisces.
Oh, cool. I love the juxtaposition of Pisces, Virgo.
Yeah, it's a good
Yeah.
combination for sure.
It's like dream state, make it happen. Dream state, make it happen.
Exactly. I know. Sometimes it can be a little bit, interesting bouncing back between the two, because they're so different. But it's so funny. I was thinking about you with like all this water in your chart. And I'm like, oh, well, no wonder why she's like breaking down binaries because you just want to like flow.
Definitely. Yeah, rigidity doesn't work so well for me. And I think that also it creates a lot of reductionism out in the world. And then we really miss the nuance and the beauty of each other and the situation and the complexity of things. And that's obviously where water signs like to dwell.
Yeah, I know. So we're
Mhm.
going to be talking, all about um, your book, The Transitory Nature, Breaking Down Binaries for Integrated Being. I want to kind of ask you about that and how really, those breaking down those constructs can create more abundance and ease in our life and kind of what led up into this moment in time where you are so passionate about these topics.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question, and my personal journey definitely has influence on the book. However, I did try to write it also from an impersonal place so that it could appeal to lots of different people, which was exciting for me as a writer. And then my own personal journey, I've been teaching Buddhism and yoga for about 15 years now in lots of different spaces, really diverse environments. And I really started outside of the commercial space and much more in the integrative therapy space and in hospitals and with the dying and things that aren't really sort of Instagrammable and exciting.
Yeah. How did you get into it so young?
So I herniated L4, L5. I was elite level gymnast and I was 13, maybe 12 at the time. And I was going to physiotherapy and all of these things, bouncing up and down on a huge ball, looking at all these 65-year-olds around me, going, what has my life come to?
Yeah.
How am I here at such a young age? And my parents introduced me to acupuncture. And so I got a whole glimpse of a bunch of 45 plus people doing totally different things than a lot of other adults I had access to at that time in my life. And so then I found yoga through that sort of alternative journey in my early teens.
Wow. So it was really through like that healing journey that you were introduced to it and then started to really teach and share.
Yeah, I didn't have many rules growing up. One of them was go to college and tell us if you're going to do drugs, right? That was really the only thing that really needed to abide by. And so I really didn't want to go to college and I had to pick something that I could stick with and was really engaged in. And that was Eastern philosophy, Eastern texts, sacred texts, and Buddhism for me.
Awesome. And so,
Yeah.
and then what led to you being in New Mexico? Like, how did that happen?
Yeah, that's a fun journey. So I used to own commercial yoga studios in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I ended up closing the doors because I really needed to walk away from that environment. And it wasn't a sustainable situation, not just cash flow wise, but also energy wise. It wasn't something as a yogi I could continually authentically give to, and I needed to rework everything. So instead of leaving the city, I said, I'm going to give myself 12 months. I'm just going to sit in all this shit I'm going to sit in closing my businesses and looking like a failure at large and just sort this out. Because if I run away, my entire emotional frequency is going to come with me. And that's when I met my husband during that year. And we decided we wanted to be nomadic, and we built a school bus into a tiny home, and then we transitioned into a van. And during those travels, because we were rock climbing and traveling, we found northern New Mexico. And really, when we drove over the Taos Bridge, we were like, didn't talk much. We were like, just knew this is where we're going to stay. And we did.
Wow. Did you know right away when you met your husband that he was the love, your soulmate?
On a deep level, yes. I was doing this really slow, let's not have sex, let's just be friends, let's see if we can build a foundation. Everything I was doing at that point in my life was super slow and intentional, was trying not to rush into anything. And so that couple-week period really showed me that right away, first couple months.
I love that so much. It's so interesting how, like, when things are falling apart, that sometimes when, like, the biggest blessings come our way, you know?
Totally. 100% believe that. If you can stay open to it and realize, like, okay, I'm in a huge restructuring period, what's ready to come in?
Yeah. And I love how you didn't run from it. You're just like, I'm going to sit with this for a little bit and just be very present and grieve, the loss of my business. Because I think when we run from it, that's when we kind of miss the goodness that is opening up for us. Like we're beginning a new cycle.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Yeah. And I needed a moment to also figure out how I got myself into that situation. And that wasn't going to come in a 2 to 3 week period.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. Absolutely. So here you are in New Mexico and tell me a little bit about like your life there. What does like day to day look like for you?
Yeah. So day to day, I try to change it up a lot. I mean, I have certain non negotiables for me, which is be outside at least an hour a day, some type of physical movement, and seated meditation pretty much every day. And then I came out of writing the book, which was about a 3 year period. So the last year was, 3 to 4 days a week, just writing, editing, organizing, getting it ready for press. And now I'm in a totally different phase, which is really sustaining the project out in the world. And so that's requiring me to be much more extroverted in certain ways, which requires me to be much more buttoned up in other ways in the backside of my life.
Would you describe yourself as introverted or extroverted?
Definitely introverted. Hmm.
Yeah. So how is like the press for you? Like, because you kind of have to be like on and, talking and doing all the media things.
Yeah, I have been selective, right? Which is a difficult decision to make when you're in a launch period because you obviously want to say yes to everything because now the work's out in the world and it needs your love and attention and support.
Yeah.
And then I've also had to be careful with my own energy levels of what really feels like a great fit for me and an expansive space because it's such a big, triggering, intense topic that I
Hmm.
want to make sure that it's also framed in the proper spaces.
Oh, that's really beautiful. Yeah, it is. It is like, when I was thinking about it and reading the book, I'm like, oh, yeah, this could be very, triggering for some people. And so I love the way that you're, presenting it to the world and also can totally relate to the feeling of, being more introverted and really, wanting to sustain your energy and being very like intentional about things that you do and especially when it's so personal in your heart and soul that you're putting out into the world, right?
I'm sure your Pisces moon and my Pisces moon, it's kind of like, you're seeing all of me. I think I need to go take a nap or meditate or something.
Yeah. I know we're so comfortable and that's so how often do you like how long will you meditate every day?
It can range. It can range from 3 minutes to 60 minutes. It really just depends on sort of what mantra I'm working with and my menstrual cycle and the moon cycle and all of those things.
Yeah. Do you and your partner meditate together? Do you have any like rituals that you do together?
We do, yeah. When he first really got into contemplative practice, we meditated a lot together. And that's awesome. But then what it does is it creates sort of a co regulation in the field where the two of us have to be either doing the same practice or we can really feel the frequency of the other person's practice. So, about after a year of us, meditating together 4 or 5 times a week, now we really only do it 4 or 5 times a month, but we still both have our own practice.
Oh, yeah, that's still pretty regular. I love that, how you like show up for yourselves, but then also create that space to do it together. I know my partner and I have done like breath work and sound healing together, and it's really beautiful. Like never, feel so connected as when you're in that type of space and container.
Yeah, I think it's amazing. You really get a moment to process things that are otherworldly and outside of language function. So for both of us, it's really mandatory in our relationship that we're engaging in that.
Yeah, I'm sure, because you have a business that you run together, that you need to have that balance where, you're not constantly in the work mode, but you're able to kind of like recalibrate and reharmonize and come back to something bigger than that.
Yes, brilliant point. Exactly. Because sometimes it's so easy to be in that ideas space, which can be really connected to our business when we run two businesses together. So, and we're different roles in each. So there's sort of this dance all the time that's happening. And then to be able to put that down and be in our partnership.
Yeah. So, something I'm so curious to ask you about, because I know for a lot of people, it's like, especially 2020, there's been a lot of working from home and a lot of partnerships where you're, together quite a bit of the time. And on top of that, you're, as you mentioned, running two businesses together. So, it's like you're really, really spending quite a bit of time together. So, how do you handle it when like you do have a disagreement or there is like friction that comes up?
Definitely. I would say 90% of the time, we really try to deal with it right then and there. And that takes some skill and some practice doing that, right? Because we all have our different tendencies to either withdraw from the situation or shut down or use an old coping mechanism that might be very violent if you try to deal with it right then and there, if you don't have the sort of proper perspective on what you're bringing into the situation. But over the course of our relationship, it's like time is valuable and time is precious, and we both respect that with each other. So if there's some type of sharp edge, it's kind of like, let's just do this really quick now. Not that we need to put pressure on it, but it's like, hey babe, what's up? Vice versa. And then I have to be okay with, if I notice the energy's off and he's asking me that question, then I need to be like, oh shit, yeah, something is up, let's do this.
Yeah, I know.
Hmm.
I think that's so important because I think sometimes like you can be in a mode where it's like hard to even, if you're not confrontational, it's like, oh, there might be like something that's a little that's off, and maybe we ignore it or maybe like, you're in busy in the moment and you're not addressing it. But I love that you like really try to attune to anything that's off, like any frequency or and just like, hey, what's up? Let's have a conversation about this. Like let's discuss it because you're able to like really get back into that harmony set point a lot easier
Hmm.
when you do.
Yeah. That's so important. And then also to realize maybe the first couple sentences out of his mouth or the first couple sentences out of my mouth are this figuring out what's up, and to not take any of that stuff personally. It's not as though it's directed at me with a sharp edge or vice versa. It's like, wait, is that actually the case? Or why don't we like explore that just a little bit more so that there isn't an extra compounding emotion with that sort of reactivity space?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so I wanted to ask you, like, who have been some of the biggest inspirations in your life leading up into this present moment?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely had a few. It's really beautiful traditionally in the yoga world that every teacher has a teacher. And that's something that's really humbling and important, to be a student and a teacher simultaneously. So that's been a big part of my path. I think early on, before I really knew what direction I wanted to go, it was really souls that had already passed, like Krishnamurti or Sri Aurobindo, when I was first reading and really in the academic side of things. And then as I got a little bit further along the path, my two longest standing teachers have been Paramatma Siri Sadhana and Richard Rosen.
Awesome. Yeah, yeah. I was going
Yeah.
to ask you. There's something so, like an academic element to your writing, and I figured, you must have, studied a lot of this and on a very deep level. So, like, what are some ways that you've like really dove into this realm of binaries?
Hmm. So my initial love was Vedanta, which is like the texts at the end of the Vedas. And one of them is called The Crest Jewel of Discrimination, which really has you look at both sides of issues in a non-dualistic way. And I think non-dualism is it's really interesting in commercial spirituality because it gets watered down really fast. Like we're all one and we're from one big soul and we're this vibrating entity and all of these things, which aren't 100% false, but also really reduce how you see yourself as an agent right in that sea, which sometimes we have to see separation. So I think exploring non-binary worldview was something that came out of those initial studies, the crest jewel of discrimination.
Yeah. And for anyone who isn't familiar, could you just break it down for us? What is non-binary worldview?
Definitely. Yeah. So in the book, what I try to do is take what our consciousness normally terms as opposites, and we sort of swing from either side of the spectrum, or one side of the spectrum is defined by the other side of the spectrum, and say, okay, what is a summational archetype? If I'm going to live a life of both and I'm not just going to be the wild woman or the sacred masculine, and I actually am all of the things, both those things, and none of those things, then what's another language set to describe that old binary thinking that's less reductionist and more creative and expansive for me?
How do you think that we get stuck in the binaries? Like how is it limiting? Maybe if you could like unpack some examples for us.
Sure. So I think what's so limiting about it is that it stops the higher levels of mind, which is asking questions, asking questions, asking questions, not looking for answers, always asking questions. And when we think, oh, I'm Republican or oh, I'm a female, and we automatically assign those labels to ourselves, right? That's binary thinking. I'm one of the opposites from which the spectrum I'm defining. And then we stop asking questions about, well, what if I want to be more masculine?
Yeah.
What if I actually want to see what's going over there on the blue side? What if I want to just read some things I really don't agree with and ask some questions about my own views?
I love how you're explaining this. I feel like, I mean, I definitely can relate to this so deeply. And I feel like a lot of people can because we've gotten into a world that has packed everything in nice, neat little boxes. And I feel like, our souls, I know mine is like yearning for more, fluidity because I think that it is like, we're looking for like finite answers or like black and white. And a lot of times there's just, gray. Like we can both be right or we can both agree to respect each other's opinions on topics. And I feel like right now there's just so much polarity that exists in our world. And it's hard. I feel like that we feel the effects of that, friction of I don't think that we're meant to live in so much polarity. I know like, people say this human experience, this 3D experience is meant to be have a quite a bit of polarity, but yet we're choosing that reality, right? We're co-creating it. And I think binary thinking is a construct that really creates that type of structure and rigidity that can be very limiting.
Hmm. Yeah, I think I totally agree. And one step further, it's like if I'm always right and I'm weaponizing the idea of right, then how am I actually going to create a harmonious life? Right? I'm here to be in relationship with the earth, with the soil, with you, with my partner, with my family, right? And if I'm really attached to my own right, then there's no harmony happening.
Yeah, I have goosebumps as you're saying that because I just feel like right now, like I just think that there's such a deep longing to find a middle ground and to say, whatever you believe or, whatever, how you identify, it's like we love, there's a love that we share in this human experience. And we're so deeply interconnected, and I think that this is a great step to be able to have these type of conversations and shed light on some of the things that maybe we might not be aware of that are kind of playing out beneath, in these programs that we can, attune to and really unpack and see what really resonates as truth for us.
Mm-hmm. 100% of what's actually sitting underneath, which I think we don't really we don't put that into language much. And that was really my mission with the book, is how do I bring a non-binary vernacular into our lived experience right now?
Was there something specific that triggered you that you were like witnessing in society or in your like own personal environment that you're like, this really needs to get out in the world? Like, you spent 3 years writing this book, and there's so much information and knowledge that's contained within it. So, what inspired it?
Definitely. So, the first section of each chapter are those anthropomorphized anecdotes. And those are composites of people that I've worked with over the last, really 10 years. But in the last five, I've really dove into natal chart work and working one on one with people in 6 month containers or 12-month containers. And so I really started seeing questions around these nine binaries pop up all of the time: hustle flow, self will, destiny. And it wasn't always like a direct question from the student, but it was some grappling with, oh, I hate what I'm doing over here. So it looks like the opposite is the answer. So why don't I swing really aggressively over there and try to do better at managing my time, or I'll do more self care, or I'll slow it down, or all of these
Right.
things. And then we get to the other side of the binary, and there's still this displacement in the body because it doesn't fully feel like us either.
Yeah, that's so, so true. I'm thinking about like, especially in the, entrepreneurial space, online businesses, it's kind of like you said, the hustle or the flow or the lack and abundance. Like, I just need to go from lack to abundance. And how do I get there? And, having shame around feeling lack, or scarcity, um, maybe if we could start with that one and maybe go a little bit deeper.
Definitely. Yeah. So I think for the lack and abundance chapter, what I really tried to do was look at the earthly ecosystem and the human ecosystem as parallel entities, and how we see the lack and abundance conversation really diverging from parallel. And we're really moving more towards extractive capitalism inside the abundance conversation, and saying, like, okay, I need to make more money. I need to have more clients. I need to sell more products. That means my production loop gets bigger. This more and more, more understanding. I need more likes. I need more clicks, right? It doesn't take into account the environmental ecosystem that we're really unsustainably dipping into 24/7. And as a yogi and a really committed human to, I want to be a equal part of this ecosystem, it was tough for me to see at large this constant conversation around abundance without the impact of abundance. And then we do see so much of, when someone hits a certain income, or we perceive them as like really, really wealthy, almost this demonizing when they hit that upper spectrum. And that didn't feel beautiful either, in a way. It's like we're saying we want more of this, and then we demonize the people at the top end of the spectrum, which I totally understand. In extractive capitalist system, that's very, very difficult to grapple with. And then, but we're saying it's so beautiful, but then what is the underlying unsustainable root that's causing those sort of distasteful reactions across the spectrum, was really interesting for me.
Yeah. So when you sort of provide guidance, which I love that you do towards the end of each chapter, is like, how do we get into like a more sustainable flow? Because it's kind of like one of those things where, especially with lack and abundance, like everybody wants to feel abundant, right? Like everybody wants to get into that flow state. But how do we do that in a sustainable way?
Totally. So, in the end of chapter 4, I really suggest that you do what's called a human and earthly resources report, and that we start changing our value metric. And we don't
Mhm.
just put our value metric and abundance on revenue, growth, clicks, likes, sales, customers, right? These things that inside capitalism feel like value metrics, and that we actually have to shift our perception of value and what we're really willing to risk for our perception of value. Like, example, the other morning I was just super taxed, and I said, you know what? I'm going to say no to the whole morning. Guess what risk I'm taking with my time? A hit in capitalistic abundance. I'm okay with that because I understand that my value metric is saying that silence, peace, well-being, and space is more valuable to me than, being on 10 more podcasts. And I know that's a really, really challenging pivot to make when we're coming out of this scarcity mindset. But there's this underlying abundant sustainability that starts to happen when you take a value metric outside of extractive capitalism and really look at the resources within you and the earth that aren't renewable.
Mhm.
Wow, why isn't the value metric going way up on what's unrenewable?
I love that so much. Yeah, and I think, my existence as an entrepreneur changed when I changed my metric system, my values, and I like when I started out, like those benchmarks of like how much, money is the company making? How many employees do you have? How much, growth is there, over time? It's like those were just ingrained in me. I came from the corporate world and, this, you know, uh, ingraining of achieving. And so to like pivot from that, like I feel was such a blessing because it was like my whole kind of foundation was stripped away and I was able to like rebuild that. And my measure now is like, how does my soul feel? Like, does this
Mhm,
feel aligned to me? Does it feel abundant, what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis. And I know that that's not easy. I actually feel
mhm.
grateful that I did have sort of like this like redirect and almost like huge pivot that happened because otherwise like those metrics of success are so deeply ingrained in our society.
They are for sure. And then it's like, how do I consume that deeply ingrained metric less? Because we're consuming all of the time. And if we
Yeah.
want to be more sustainable in our choices, then we can't be consuming all the time. So, what sort of ideas am I consuming that are the most unsustainable? Those have got to go,
I
out the
know.
door right away.
Yeah, yeah, you bring up a really good point because like the reinforcing of it and I even go to like okay, your social circle and what you're like whether, podcasts and not to knock this by any means, but there's like the boss babe, like how much,
Hmm.
that energy of like how much money are you making as a CEO or entrepreneur, not to say anything, negative about that at all, because there's a place for it 100%. But if that's what you're consumed with, of course, that's what you're going to be fixated on, And I think
Totally.
that it is really important to have that balance.
Hmm. Yeah, and then more of a, okay, so I've created so much abundance, then, where am I sharing? How is my like cultural ethos that I'm creating? Am I creating more abundance for other people? Right? Those kind of questions could be huge when you reach a level like that.
Yeah,
Hmm.
absolutely. Absolutely. So I want to go into masculine and feminine. I know this is, a topic that can be triggering. And I think just because like it's so ingrained in us from like the moment that we're born, actually, pre um, when we're
Hmm.
born, like, we have all of these constructs around gender in our society. Um, how is that limiting in your opinion?
Yeah. So this was actually one of the most challenging chapters to write. It was also the entry point for me into non-binary worldview as well. So I felt really passionate about making sure that it made it into the nine, masculine, feminine. And it's, I call it in the book, a subliminal software download that we did not consent to. And I think that's really interesting to consider, especially the larger conversation around consent and then the power and hierarchical dynamics around consent. So I started thinking all the way back into my own incarnation. What are ideas, beliefs, identity markers that I didn't have an option to consent to? And one of which was all of the subliminal messaging that comes with being born in a female body. And so that sort of, opened the floodgates for me in terms of body as vehicle. What does a non binary expression of a physical form look like? And that's why I titled the chapter Body as Vehicle. And I think that it was paramount for me in the sustainability of my partnership because I'm actually much more masculine in energy than he is, and that didn't work so well for me in previous partnerships. And so actually being able to challenge the heteronormative dynamic of hierarchy and relationship was very important to me and many of my students, because so many of my students were saying like this happened and maybe I should be more feminine. The polarity conversation has just exploded, and it's exploded in a way that's actually very rooted in the heteropatriarchy. So I really wanted to take that on in this chapter.
What are some ways that, like, some specific examples that you can share that you think that are built in that are limiting around those gender roles?
Mhm. Yeah, I think one of the things that was so important to me in the book was sort of describe the ideas of the manipulative feminine and the much more expanded feminine, and then really the low vibrating masculine that we're seeing really regurgitated all the time as masculine, and then sort of this hatred that's thrown at that. And then I also wanted to talk about how the sacred masculine isn't really an anecdote to what we're seeing in the patriarchy, and that we actually have to find more fluidity. And without that fluidity, then we're just still going to be regurgitating the heteropatriarchy, because it's something that we didn't consent to at a very young age in the way that we were programmed or even dressed or talked to, or the values or the ideas that we might have had when we were young about what we could be or how we could express ourselves out in the world. So I think we can sort of understand the limiting pressure of that from a very young age.
Yeah. So if somebody's sort of new to this conversation and, they're understanding it and kind of like getting in touch with what that might mean for them, like that might be like, you know, as a male, it's not okay to cry or be vulnerable or express emotions. Or if you're in a female body, you may, want to be nice or, put other people first or, whatever the kind of
Mhm.
societal conditioning could be.
Totally. Yeah. And I think that we're seeing that societal conditioning, it's actually so complex and unique to our family unit, to our educational ethos. There's definitely, that's why I keep the platitude section throughout the whole book, so that we can really debunk even some of the myths that we think are expansive, especially with gender.
Yeah. What do you think the
Mhm.
the solution is if we're gonna go into more of a divine union with the two? Or
Yeah. So I think in the long run, I think what we're seeing with trans legislation, anti-trans legislation, this was a conversation I maybe had 2 years ago with a group of friends, where many of the male bodied people in the room were saying, I don't think that trans people should be in, trans children should be able to go into the opposite gender sport role or whatever, and I'm saying, well, why not? Why not?
right.
Why can't we actually just flip the whole paradigm on its head and say, like, okay, how about we have everyone have access to success across boundary? Why isn't this something that's being more talked about in especially our intimate circles?
Hmm.
Maybe even with our children, in the way that we're parenting our children. I'm not a parent, but I work with lots and lots of parents, and this comes up all the time of, my daughter, and I'm using air quotes, wants to express herself in these ways, but it's actually very difficult for the school to deal with, or even her peers to deal with. How should I cope with this as a parent? And I think having massive conversations around, you know why do we feel that this category is equal? Does that make sense the way that I said it? Like, why do we have women's sports and men's sports? Like, why do we feel like that's equal access? Right?
Hmm.
Why don't we feel like it's more equal access to say, like, I need you to be you and me to be me, and your expression of you doesn't hinder my expression of me. I can go do other things well, and this person can go do other things well. Right? So that, like, there's much more equality outside of the binary, because when we're in binary thinking, equality is kind of like an evil idea in a weird costume. Does that make sense? It
Hmm.
actually doesn't give full equality.
Hmm. Yeah, that does make sense. And I think, like, I love how you describe it as binary thinking because it is just a paradigm that we apply to so many different things.
Mhm. We have a long way to go for sure, right? Some of our medicine and our studies are rooted in the heteropatriarchy. Like, I don't mean to be nonchalant with this conversation. I think that it's going to be very complex, very trying for many different people all over the world, and we're going to have to be really courageous in the way that we challenge the systems that organize us.
Yeah. What are the conversations that you think are most beneficial to have around this topic? And like how would you challenge people, listeners right now to like expand their awareness when it comes to this topic?
Mhm. I think gendering inside your psyche less. So
Mm,
that was one of the things that I saw happening a lot of, I'm more feminine when, or this person's more masculine when. And if we could actually just take a moment and suspend those terms and actually talk about the energy that happens between different beings and not put them in two separate categories and actually create more cohesiveness with who has access to what behavior and in what spaces. And you can really just do that as a contemplative experiment in your own mind, even in ways that you look at yourself in the mirror, right? You're going to start to see sort of all of these um, funny correlations that you're like, whoa, I can't believe I'm even limiting my own expression in that way.
wow, that's so cool. I love that. Could you maybe share, like, from your perspective, because you said, like, you feel like, you resonate with some masculine energy and like how you bring that forward or identify that?
Totally. Yeah, I mean, I think that I also felt a lot of segregation in weird ways as a female bodied person who behaved like that. You're intimidating, all of these kinds of things growing up. And that was so almost frustrating and limiting in a way where I just wanted to say, like, wait, what do you mean? This is just how I'm organized. Like, there isn't much of a choice here. This is like my natal imprint. This is the direction I want to go in.
Yeah.
And I think really fully just saying, okay, I'm okay with the consequences of society. And I'm going to really build the strength inside my own central nervous system so I can handle the consequences of society. And obviously, it won't be graceful all the time. But if it's graceful 70% of the time, then I really know I'm on that, self transformation journey of handling those consequences.
I love that so much. Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, of
I think
course.
we have time for maybe like one other binary. Is there any other one that you really would love to share with us?
I mean, I think that chapter 7 is really awesome, which is attachment aversion and then cultivating middle path awareness. I think that the pleasure pain binary and good bad binary really, that is so deeply rooted in how we see ourselves and others. And so that chapter was really, really, really fun for me to write. And I really wanted to um, bring to the surface the idea that we are deeply attached to what we're adverse to and give many, many, many examples of that about how we're attached to what we're averse to, because
Mm.
many of us intellectually don't want to admit that out loud because it would sort of be soul crushing, but yet we have all of these behaviors that sort of hide those aversions.
What would be an example?
Yeah. So I use a funny example of, oh, I quit smoking, but here I am at a crosswalk and someone's smoking next to me. And I'm like, oh, like that type of oh, wow, it's still there. It's still really hardwired into me. Even though I might be making choices in an opposite direction, I still feel that inkling to do something that is lower vibrating or less than, and to not have a compounding, punishing emotion for that.
Yeah, I guess what's coming up for me is just like an example, and I don't even know why because I don't watch the news, but like people who have like an aversion to a certain, you know, thing that's happening, in our world or politically, and that it's still like it becomes almost like an obsession, and you're
Mhm.
not in a place of neutrality whatsoever. You're just really reinforcing that attachment.
Totally. I think a great example is like defund the police and then the massive rise of cancel culture.
Hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
So, okay, we're all for not being policed, but then all of a sudden, here we go, sort of weaponizing the good, bad binary, appropriate, inappropriate binary against each other in our own private lives or in the virtual space. It's just like, how can we hold both those conundrums side by side? Like, my mind just goes, poof. I don't think it's possible. Why aren't we asking bigger questions about why in God's name are we holding these two conundrums next to each other?
Yeah, I know. You open like Pandora's box when you get into these topics, and it's fascinating and it's important. And yet, there's not always a clear solution, right? I think a lot of the solution lies in just bringing awareness to it and expanding our awareness around these topics.
Hmm. Totally. And then I think a willingness to actually tread in the space with deep respect for yourself and another, and to know that not everything is for us or against us, is maybe the first postural organization to enter into these non binary spaces.
Yeah. Sue, this has been such an amazing conversation. What words of wisdom, what would you leave listeners with? Any last tidbits?
Hmm. I think that there's something really beautiful in this idea of like private dignity, and not everything has to be an idea that you're putting out into public that you've actually sorted out yet, and that it's okay to rest in a place of no answers inside of yourself. I think long term in spiritual growth, we want to have less answers than more answers, and to not take a egoic hit when you don't have an answer. To actually say, oh, now I'm in the liminal space. To really embody more of that.
I love that. So beautiful. Where can listeners go to learn more about you, get your book, all of the things?
Yeah, so our website's suehunt.com. So that's easy to remember. And you can find the book there and all of its distribution channels there, and the work that I do with my husband there as well.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Emily. I really appreciate it.